California Native Plant Society, San Gabriel Mountains chapter. I'm Cliff McLean. I'm currently the chapter president. I see a lot of names that are familiar and some names I'm not familiar with. So welcome to everybody, and especially to the people who are new to our meetings. Very glad to see you joining us, and I hope we'll be able to meet in person in the not too distant future. Then let's get in directly with our two speakers. Their role primarily tonight is to answer questions, although I think they do have some prepared remarks as well. They are Orchid Black and Barbara Eisenstein. Both of these women are longtime members of CNPS and our chapter, and both of them have been on the board most of the time that they've been involved with CNPS. And so they are among the backbone of the chapter. Orchid has a landscaping business, and so she is a horticultural expert. Barbara is not in the business, but she has worked at the Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden and was their wildflower hotline specialist part of that time. And she also has a book that she's written about growing native plants in your garden. So they both know a lot about what they're talking about, and so I will let them do the talking. And I think Orchid's going to go first. Is that right, Orchid?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to give a little introduction about what we were hoping to do today so that people are somewhat oriented. So it was listed as a garden Q&A, and by garden Q&A, the questions can come from anybody. They can come from me, which they will, and maybe Orchid, and the answers can come from anybody. We're going to each start off by giving a little introduction to gardening for pollinators, in particular for the monarch butterfly, which has been in the news so much. So Orchid's going to begin by showing parts of a presentation on some of the plants that bloom right now and are really great pollinator plants. And then I'm going to pick up on the monarch. And then hopefully we're going to open it up for discussion. To me, I find it a little, I'm looking at all these black rectangles with names written in them, except some people have pictures in those black rectangles. But maybe when we all start to really get into the discussion part, we could show the video so we can see each other and really get into a presentation. So you got it, Orchid? You on there?
I do.
Good.
Can everybody see my screen?
Great.
Yes. Okay, so most people who are in this talk know this probably, but gardens are refuges for pollinators. And of course, everybody knows native plants evolved with native insects. And this is a tarantula hawk. One of the more scary bites, but such a beautiful pollinator. And butterfly populations are dwindling. If you came to this talk, you already know this. And here's a great picture from my friend Jim Otterstrom, who is no longer with us, but had some beautiful pictures of butterflies. Our threats are generally habitat loss, and that includes tillage because some pollinators overwinter in the ground. Disease, we'll talk about that as it relates to monarchs specifically, and pesticides. And so what this means is for the vast amount of our agricultural land, pollinators, which the land actually needs, are not very present. So where can they be present? They can be present here in gardens. Urban gardens have less pesticide pressure and less tillage. They have this ideal mix of flowering shrubs, perennials, and grasses. And pollinators need continuous bloom, which is often present in gardens. Gardens are refuges for pollinators, and they can thrive in very small patches of habitat. And gardens need pollinators. So pollinators need gardens, and gardens need pollinators. So visitation by native bees increases fruit set by around 45% in sun gold cherry tomatoes relative to wind pollination. Bee visitation also results in larger tomatoes. This is my garden, and the tomatoes, the baby tomatoes in it, but the weight can be nearly double. So that's really, really important. And then some gratuitous pictures of pollinators. And then I just want to share some of my favorite pollinator plants. And so rabbit brush, and why I chose these plants is because when you stand near them, they are alive when other plants may not be alive. And what I mean by alive is they're buzzing or humming with all kind of different things. And I first noticed this on a hike with Cliff and Gabi. And we saw this Ericameria bush, not this particular Ericameria, but the Ericameria was alive in a way that other plants were not. So the bladder pod is another wonderful plant, mostly because continuous bloom. Remember the slide about continuous bloom? That's important. And so the Isomerus is a desert plant, but it also does grow near the coast at Madrona Marsh. So it will grow from here to there. And it nearly always has a bloom on it. Salvias for the summer. These are a couple more gratuitous plant and pollinator pictures. And then I want to show the structure of a daisy, and most of you know what a aster family plant looks like, or used to be called composite or sunflower family. And they are clusters of plants. So they have much more nectar available to them because they are clusters of blooms. And because they open slowly, as you can see in this picture, the individual florets open slowly. Many of you were here with us for the wonderful CNPS Fest that we had in September, and Terry Keller had many, many pictures of all kinds of wildlife on the Leia. So I want to reference the Leia as a great plant for everything. There were foxes, squirrels, all kind of butterflies, many, many things are drawn to the Leia. So this is an annual. Achillea millefolium is another plant in the aster family. Deerweed used to have a sign on it at Theodore Payne Foundation saying that it was the premier butterfly plant. And so I'm including it for that. Milkweed, Barbara will talk about more. And we will also talk about concerns about gardening at this time of year. And here's milkweed and monarch. Baelia, again, a plant that that blooms nearly all the time and has that wonderful aster structure. Cirsium and Celia californica, coast sunflower bush. And this one blooms also nearly all the time. So, you know, when you're looking for something that's blooming in January, this is that plant. The California buckwheat is among the most used host plant for butterflies. And so there is an entire website called Buckwheat Brings Butterflies. I think it's a Bob Allen website. But there are more listings for buckwheat and as a larval plant in the Southern California guide to gardens than for any other plant. And Mickey Long has told us that also the Eriogonum fasciculatum foliosum is, in his opinion, the most used plant by butterflies. A couple other buckwheats, so you're not limited to the plain cream color. And then salvias in summer are multi-purpose pollinator plants, bringing both hummingbirds and butterflies and bees. For the fall, the goldenrod, along with the rabbit brush, and then toyon. Before I got into native plants, I called toyon the lunch tree. So because everything ate in there, so squirrels, blue jays, mockingbirds, all the things that I knew. And then they, of course, they have flowers which are mostly visited by flies in summer. And that is all that I'm gonna talk about, and then I'm gonna hand it over to Barbara.
Okay, all set, I think. Let me see here. All right. 1 second. So, okay, I'm going to also do a share screen. And let me begin by saying that monarchs have been in the news. They've been in the New York Times. They've been in the LA Times. There's just been a lot of discussion about the incredible decline in the number of monarch butterflies that we've seen this year. And that's for many reasons. So I just want to frame this whole question in that way. Let me see here. Oopsie, I don't want to do that. So I'm here and I need to share my screen, which I'm going to do right here. Okay. Did that work? That didn't work. Yeah, there we go. So now I've got a shared screen. I want to say I'm going to be giving a talk on this on March 6th for the Seed Library of LA Altadena. It's an online Zoom talk. My talk is not completed, so we're not going to go through the whole thing here, but I will post it on my website, and also I think they record it and post it as well. And the reason that that might be helpful to some of you is because there are a lot of resources on it. So you don't have to, try to find them. You can just see them later. So anyway, the talk will be on gardening to help save the monarch. And now why doesn't it go to the next? There we go. Imagining a world without monarch butterflies is a sad place because they're really quite beautiful. And I wanted to bring up this, which is one of many pieces of evidence that there's just been this precipitous decline in monarch butterflies. Now, the blue line are the volunteers who are out there trying to observe them. And you can see that has been going up. This is 1997, 2020. And these are counts. This is a count that goes on here on the West Coast. It's called the Thanksgiving count. And what they're counting the butterflies, the monarch butterflies, in their overwintering sites. So I don't know how many of you have been fortunate enough to go to some of these sites. They typically have eucalyptus trees, and Travis Longcore has a lot to say about the need for these non-native trees if we want to preserve these overwintering sites, but that's a whole nother story. But if you got to go there during Thanksgiving, back in 1997 and earlier, there were thousands and thousands, and I think millions of these. Oh, well, no, here we go. Yeah, 1.2 million was the count back then. And it was even higher earlier. And it just dropped off precipitously until we got to 2020. And in 2020, they basically have counted none. There were none there. Some of the overwintering sites had problems because of the fires. But this is devastating. This is really devastating. During the talk, I will talk about the butterfly life cycle, which is obviously critical if you're trying to save this wonderful insect. And of course, their migration. There's oftentimes a lot of confusion between the eastern and western monarch. I think that they are the same species. I think it's not very well understood whether there's any mixing. You see these lines, there's a question mark on that line. So, you know, if they spend the winter down in Mexico, do they sometimes come up to the West Coast? Or do we just have migrations that go from our overwintering sites, which are the blue ones, over the mountains, you know, into the desert, up and back, summer and winter time. But these things are very important, and they're trying to collect more and more information on this and using citizen scientists like you and me to go out there and try to count these butterflies and give them a better sense of where they are and where they're going. You know, they count these overwintering sites, but what do they do when they're not wintering? Where exactly are they going? I mean, we see them around, but are we seeing resident populations that don't migrate? Or are some of the migrators coming in and then going back out? So a lot of these questions haven't been answered. I am going to skip through this. I wish I could go faster. Hold it, I think I can. I don't know if I can. Well, we'll just do it this way. I want to get to this slide because there's been just a huge amount of discussion about whether it's okay to grow the non-native tropical milkweed, which is so commonly grown in the West Coast. Today, I was out on a walk. I saw a tropical milkweed, and on the tropical milkweed was a monarch butterfly. And it, you know, it does your heart good, except it's not quite the right time of year, and this presents problems. Somebody told me, I can't remember who told me this, but was it you, Orchid? Maybe, that some people have planted the tropical milkweed. If we get a late frost, the milkweed, the tropical milkweed will die. It may die completely. It may just die to the ground and come back. But in any event, if there are any butterflies, if there are any larvae on there, were you telling me this?
Yes, I had a client that this happened to, and so there were larvae on the plant that froze to death.
So yeah, this is a problem when you start messing with seasonality, particularly in an insect that migrates. So what they're really finding, though, is that the monarch butterfly, and this was first noted, I think, around 2006 by Emory University. A scientist was looking at eastern monarch butterflies in Florida. And what she noticed was that it seemed that the butterflies that were staying on the non-native tropical milkweeds there were having a higher risk of disease. It's a parasitic protozoa or protozoan parasite. In any event, it leads to a disease, which I'm not going to try to pronounce because we can just say OE. And what happens right here is a picture of what it looks like when a monarch is infected with it. So what happens is all of these caterpillars are on this tropical milkweed. They're not migrating, they're staying put, and they're sharing disease. It's not COVID, it's OE that they're sharing. And the caterpillars are eating this plant, they're sharing the disease. They go and become a chrysalis eventually. And as they start to emerge when they start to emerge, they're weak and sick. Their wings oftentimes don't expand completely, and they can't make the migration. So it's believed that those who migrate, they don't continue to share this disease because the ones that are infected don't make it, they die. But if they're all staying put on this tropical milkweed in South Pasadena, where I live, Southern California, wherever anybody else lives, they're sharing this disease. And the question is, because we don't know where all these monarchs go, do any of those who are living and appear not to be migratory, appear to be resident, do they interact with the migratory population, thereby infecting them? So it is recommended by Xerces Society and lots of other environmental groups that we not plant tropical milkweed. Lots of people have it and they don't want to get rid of it because it's easier to grow. It's got very colorful flowers. So one mitigation that one can do is to cut it down in the late fall, early winter. Keep it cut back. So when it starts to emerge in the middle of the winter, you're continuing to cut it down and let it finally come back around the time that our native milkweeds come back, which is March, April, May, in those times. So that's one possibility. That's one thing that one could do if you have tropical milkweed and you want to keep it. My concern is that we all have good intentions, but I think a lot of people won't end up doing that. You know, you just get busy and then you see butterflies on it and you don't, oopsie, let me go back here. And you don't want to do that. So that's my warning on the use of tropical milkweed. Let me just say a couple of things. When I used to work at what's now California Botanic Garden, that was one of the biggest questions I got. Can I use tropical milkweed? Does it matter? And my answer to that question was, well, in the East, it matters. This study that I'm pointing out here is one that was done in 2016 in the West. So we know now that it does affect the population here as well. There were lots of discussion about whether these different milkweeds have different amounts of alkaloids in them, making the butterfly more toxic to birds and thereby being a survival strategy for the insect. I've read about this up and back and all around as to whether it matters. And I don't know that I have a definitive answer to that. Narrowleaf milkweed tends to be one of the less toxic milkweeds, which means if the birds figure out, and young birds are the ones that eat milkweed, eat monarchs, and they either puke and remember, or if the monarch, it doesn't have much toxin in it, then they will learn that, yeah, there's another food source. I can eat these. So again, the different levels of toxicity among the different non-native milkweeds and native milkweeds might be significant. So I would just point that out as well. Let's see, what else did I want to show here? Orchid already gave you many different possibilities for plants that one can grow for pollinators. And I think that the message really has to be this. You want to get some things that bloom early. You want them to bloom through the summer. And this is for all pollinators. And then the fall and going right on into the winter. And then there's much less flowers. There are fewer pollinators out and about. And that's the seasonality of Southern California. So I think that using native plants makes sense because we don't have to recreate conditions that have been created through just years and years of evolutionary change by relying on native plants, particularly locally native plants. I noticed that Orchid mentioned sages for later in the year, but Munz's sage, Salvia munzii, is one of the earliest blooming sages. The last thing I want to point out are the milkweeds that are native to our very local area. And it's Asclepias fascicularis, narrowleaf milkweed. There's woolly pod milkweed, Asclepias areocarpa. And California milkweed is slightly higher elevation, but another one to try. There are many, many more. I wrote them all down. There are many more milkweeds that are native to California. One that's absolutely gorgeous is Asclepias speciosa, which is showy milkweed. It has a similar time that it goes dormant to the others. It does not typically exist down here. It's a more Northern California milkweed, so think about that. And then there are a whole myriad of just wonderful desert milkweeds. There's Asclepias erosa. They're just all kinds, and they look really, really cool. But I think that if we really care, that we should really try to move ourselves in the direction of locally native, because the pollinators are in big trouble. I'll show you just a few pictures of the, let me see. When on the share screen, is the screen getting blocked by the?
No.
No, okay.
Each
So,
person can move it around to suit them.
Okay, great. So narrow leaf milkweed is the most common milkweed. It is very broad range. And this is a cluster of them at Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden. And they've successfully grown it in many, many places. When I started talking to this group, I mentioned that it's a Q&A, and there are going to be questions and answers, hopefully by the audience as well. And I have never been successful growing narrow leaf milkweed. It sometimes comes up, it looks pretty weak. It's not for lack of trying. I have tried to grow it in the nature park. We've planted seed directly because I was told that was the way to do it. And it comes up, but we've never gotten a really nice stand of these things. So I'm just all ears. I know I've brought this question up at other times, but I'd like us to discuss that a little more. This picture, so this is a buckeye, again, at California Botanic Garden. This is a buckeye that blooms at the same time that the narrowleaf milkweed blooms, and they're both pink. And believe me, this picture does it no justice. The two shades of pink are slightly different, and it was just amazingly striking. And I want that. Here's woolly pod milkweed. Again, this is at Rancho, and this is the way you would see it more out in the wild. If you get close to the flower, which would be looking in here, it's gorgeous, and it has this woolly pod. So this is a really good one. I think this one opens earlier, starts earlier. It's one we want to have. So, and finally, California milkweed. This one, I took this picture and I can't quite remember where. But again, you can see when you think about tropical milkweed and what it looks like compared to some of these, I understand, but the monarch butterfly is a very beautiful thing. So I think it behooves us to try very hard to grow these plants in our gardens. I'm going to stop sharing here. And I'd like to, at this point, let me make sure I've said everything I was thinking of saying. Yes, I did. So I think we'd like to open it up, and people can, how are we going to do this with the muting and unmuting and the questions?
Well, since we got a couple questions while you were speaking, I was thinking we'd start with those three and then unmute everyone once we've got those first three questions answered.
Okay, sounds good. So
The first one was from Carlin Tran. Carlin, if you're here, I let you unmute yourself. His question was, what advice or response would you say about attitudes to have and goals?
about, I'm sorry, say again, attitudes and goals?
Yeah.
Oh,
What attitude do you bring to your gardening?
Okay. Orchid or me?
I'd be happy to address that to begin with. One of my teaching partners is David King. And David says, you are not a gardener if you have not killed 100 plants. So.
Well, then I'm a gardener.
So, but I would say if you're interested in edible gardening, you might consider some of the salvias that make, and you live in San Diego, that you might want to consider salvias like Whirly Blue or any of those type of Clevelandi hybrids, because they make a wonderful pesto if you blanch the leaves before you make the pesto.
Nice.
And so that's my an easy plant that will also bring pollinators to your garden.
I guess what I would say is that gardening should be fun. Number one, it's supposed to be a hobby, but it's also, we have a responsibility. We tell ourselves that we own land. I'm not sure that that's a very good concept, the concept of owning land. But we do have a lot of control and a lot of effect on the land. And so I think do no harm is an important one. And I say that, and so therefore, what I'm not saying is that you have to plant only native plants or only locally native plants. In my heart of heart, that's what I wish. But I don't do it because there are just so many wonderful non-native things, and there are cultivars that are so great. But do no harm means think twice about the mow blow thing. think twice about the lawns, think twice about the pesticides. We can't keep doing this. So I guess that's my attitude. That's where I come from. Good question. There was
Rebecca?
another one, Rebecca?
Yeah, Seema. Seema had a question.
Hi, Seema.
And I'm going to ask her to unmute herself. Them to unmute themselves? I don't actually know Seema.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. My question is, I bought a gallon container of milkweed at Theodore Payne, but I also have seeds. How do I go about and what do I do? And Barbara, I'm glad you said you haven't had success because I've tried milkweed and it just doesn't work. So what do I do?
You know what I'd like? Is there anybody out there who could like raise their hand who's been really successful growing milkweed that we could hear from?
Well, I'll start and then I'll hand it over to Roger if he's here. So I've had a lot of success in gardens with Asclepias fascicularis. A lot of people forget that it is going dormant. I know we talked about that in the context of the butterflies, but sometimes people forget that in the context of the plant, it looks like it died. Do not remove the plant, even if you just forgot and left it in the can. Just plant it and see if it comes back up. Thing number 2 is it's rhizomatous, so it does wander around underground, and I have found that it often will come up where you didn't plant it. So it's hard to design around unless you design a large space, which some butterfly experts say is important. And so, or, you know, multiple plants. And the other reason to plant multiple plants and not just one is because I have gotten this call, this phone call, this text, and this email over and over, which is, where can I get some monarch? Where can I get some milkweed right now? Because the caterpillars have stripped my plant.
Yeah.
So
they're starving. They're starving. I've heard that. Yeah.
So you want to plant at least 3 or 4. Sometimes you can find it in smaller sizes, which might make it easier. But don't just plant one. You'll be sorry. I hate to say that. You could plant it even in a pot if you don't have room. And then I'm going to hand it over. Roger, are you around? Would you like to talk about seeds? We saw that you did talk about it before.
Yeah, first I want to answer the question about narrow-leaf milkweed. I have had it in a couple of places in my yard, and it grows best where there is more water. I actually have it where it has wandered around in an orchard area. So I've got citrus trees that I water them once a week or so, which native plants I don't generally water that often, but the milkweed appreciate the extra water. So extra water is something I would encourage for milkweed. And I want to echo the comment about don't dig it up, don't forget about it. If you're a very tidy gardener, you probably won't like milkweed, and you might be tempted to plant something in the winter when it's gone away. Don't do that. Leave it its space. There was something else you wanted me to talk about?
Oh,
how to plant it, how to plant seed.
Yeah, milkweed is a warm season plant. Most native plants, I do a lot of propagation of native plants by cuttings and by seeds. Most native plants, I plant the seeds in flats of dirt in the fall to coincide with the fall and winter rains. Milkweed, it will grow that way, but you can plant it in the summer and in the late summer even. I've planted some narrow-leaf milkweed in August and had damn near 100% germination. So you can plant it kind of anytime, just give it water, cover the seeds with just a little bit of soil. They don't need much, just as long as they're covered, and keep it moist for a week or two, and they'll sprout right up.
I'm going to add a little bit more to this, not because I've been successful, but because I've asked the question of people who have been. I have been told that it is better to plant it's better actually to go straight from seed in the ground. And even putting the seed in the ground, lightly on top, covering it, making sure you water. Remember, when seeds sprout, if we get a dry period, you'll lose them all. You can lose them all. But I've been told it's better to do it directly in the ground. Now, having said that, in the nature park, we've tried that in lots of places, and we have a lot of predation. They get eaten, we have gophers, and I think they just kind of knock the soil so that they may have been coming up, but then we have this pile of gopher piles. So that's been a problem. We've been trying to put gopher cages and then soil and then some seeds with some success. I am growing it in little seedling, they're called speedlings, these little seed starting things. And I put it in about a week and a half ago. It's been pretty darn chilly, and I moved it to a warmer spot, but I haven't got germination yet. And I'm like, I can't, hopefully by my talk next week, they're going to all germinate like Rogers have. So the plant itself, the 1 gallon plant, put it in the spring, because if you buy this is the one example, if you buy a 1 gallon milkweed, you put it in the fall, it goes dormant. Well, those roots to start with were pretty weak and pretty minimal. So it may come back and it may not. You really want to get this thing growing in the springtime, so it has the spring through the summer to really build up some bulk in the roots and hopefully drop its own seed and get going. So there you are, some advice from someone who's never succeeded. Does that answer that, Seema?
Well, sorry, I muted her again. Because while you were at it, you also drifted on into answering some other folks' questions. So Dolan Hunter, I think your question got answered in there. We also have Scott and Jacques Monroe, who have a series of questions. If they can unmute themselves. It's about seedlings. Go ahead.
Oh, I don't get to turn video on? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, you do.
Oh.
Yeah,
I want to see you. Yeah. It's creepy, these black square rectangles.
Yes,
I
really.
don't know if you guys remember me. I was around TPF a long time ago. Anyway.
We still can't see you. It's hard to remember you if we can't see you.
I know, and I'm clicking on start. Oh, okay.
There we are.
Oh, there you are.
Yes.
Hi.
Yes, I do remember you.
Hi, missed you guys. Anyway, so we put seeds, a bunch of seeds in one of those little indoor seed growing thingies. But so we just did that a few weeks ago, and we have 16 of them. But the question is, can we put them out now? Are they going to grow big enough? Or are they just going to be little tiny things and they'll get devoured and there won't be enough there for the caterpillars?
So my experience of plants that are rhizomatous is that they really do depend more on their roots than you would think. So I would try to get them larger. You could put them outside, but I would try to get them larger before they go into the ground.
Oh, okay.
So move them up.
Yeah, but if the I guess the thing that occurred to me is if the butterflies find them, they'll lay their eggs and then they'll come out and they'll devour the plants and then die because there's not enough plant there. So
Yes.
basically I'm afraid to put them out now, thinking that they'll be too tiny.
You might want to just move them up and get them into at least a minimum of a 4-inch.
Yeah, but still keep them inside so that the butterflies cannot get to them this year.
Yeah, and they would need
okay.
a really sunny location if you're trying to keep them inside.
Yeah, we do have a good sunny window. Although I don't know we'll be able to fit 14 or 16 4-inch pots in there. But
I'm not sure why you're so worried about the butterflies decimating those plants at this point, because what happens is that the butterfly lays an egg on not a seedling. It's usually a decent sized milkweed. It lays its egg. The egg, then the larva then emerges, which is the caterpillar, goes through 5 instars, so 5 sizes. And during that time, they're eating voraciously, but I don't think they're eating off of these little tiny seedlings. Mickey, anybody else have information? And also, I think you want to get those pots outside, not in the full sun, but you want them to have cool nights, and you want them, you don't want indoor plants.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we leave our heaters off, so it gets cold in here. But yeah, I've built a little micro nursery that I can move them out to.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'd like to say a few words about seedlings and growing them. I have grown numerous milkweed seedlings in pots in amongst the rest of my plants my propagation stash in pots outside, and I have not had trouble with caterpillars on the milkweed plants in the pots, because the milkweed plants in the pots are small enough that they're just not a big enough plant for the butterflies to be interested in coming and laying eggs on.
Okay, perfect.
So I would encourage you to be growing the milkweed seedlings outside. Native plants really, really, really want to be outside.
Yeah, I just just want to get them big enough to be able to then. I thought put them in the ground, but now I've learned go put them in 4 inches.
Yeah.
In pots and do it that way. Okay, that's fine.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay, then I had another question, and I guess it's been answered because we have lots of Eriogonums and yarrow in our garden, and it's almost never see butterflies. And I guess it's because we don't have plants blooming year round. Oh,
You should have butterflies.
no,
I don't know why you don't have butterflies.
I don't know. We're very disappointed.
Are you a neat gardener? Are you neat?
No,
That's good.
no, it's not real tidy. No, it's
Is it a shady location?
a what?
Is it a shady location?
No, not really. Well, we've got a desert willow out there is the one tree. It's not shady. No, it's that's the most shade is the desert willow.
Yeah, it's possible that you just don't have enough flowering plants to bring the population. And Orchid mentioned this, and I'm going to repeat it because it's important. Number matters. So for all of these, for all different pollinators, they don't go to one flowering plant that has like 5 flowers on it. It's got to have a lot of flowers, because what they do is they figure out how to get the pollen and the nectar, whatever it is they need and they want. They figure it out for the specific kind of flower. So you need to have masses of flowers, because it's more efficient for them to then pick up what they need from all of these. They're not going to go from a daisy to a penstemon to a this to a that. They pick one kind and they really harvest it. So clumps of flowers would be good.
Bigger masses. I guess that's what we need.
Definitely.
Okay, so we've got Portia's iPad who had a question as well.
Hi, Portia.
Hi, Barbara. So the previous person brought up an issue that I've been having as I run the Hahamunga Native Plant Nursery is, as soon as January 1st started, people have been hounding me to get narrowleaf milkweed. And I keep telling them it's dormant. It doesn't live. It doesn't, it's not, it looks like dirt. And the previous person was saying, I'm, trying to get these seeds growing now, when aren't we pushing the narrowleaf milkweed to be more than it is if we're like starting the seeds in the wrong season and trying to get all this stuff in the wrong season? Even Kitty Connolly at TPF said, don't even pretend to start narrowleaf milkweed seeds until March or April, till it's warm. And I bought a flat, I'm sorry I'm going on, but I've bought a flat from El Nativo of little rose pots that looked awful. Somebody came in yesterday and bought them all. It was just, I couldn't believe it. It was like, why are you doing this? Just, it's not the right time.
It is a little early, but you know, we've had a very warm, dry winter, so we might push it a little early. I mean, that actually is the point of why you want to have a stand of these things, so that they can start to emerge directly from the ground. When you're getting the population going, it's not quite right yet. So we do have to be patient. I agree with you so much, Portia.
And gardeners, people in general tend to be impatient, and gardeners too. You want your milkweeds right now, so you'll do everything you can to get them started. Well,
but isn't that
sometimes we can hurry things up, and sometimes we can't. So
I mean, but by hurrying everything up, you're kind of stretching the season to which you don't want it stretched, right? Isn't
well,
that
but if you're hurrying it up in order to get plants in your yard, then that's maybe not necessarily a bad thing, because you're only doing that kind of as a one-time thing.
Okay.
And then once you get them in the ground, then they will follow the seasons. And
that's true. That's true. The plants we have that are in the ground are I'm seeing a lot more leaf and stuff. It's the plants in the pots are really still all flat. They're dirt.
Yeah, and so yeah, you can kind of play with things in pots, and sometimes you can push things a little bit in terms of how they perform in the season, or you know, stretch their seasons sometimes. Once you get things in the ground, which is, my experience is, native plants really, really, really want to be in the ground.
Yes.
They want that ground to expand their roots and kind of reach out, that they can't do that in a pot. And so once you put them in the ground, then they will honor the seasons that they grow in, and you will not be able to keep a native milkweed green in December and January, because it will just disappear.
Yes, it will disappear.
Right. I'd like to bring up, I don't know if this was a question, but it should be, the aphids on milkweed. So I think they're oleander aphids. Is that what they are? Yep.
Yes.
And if you have a milkweed, then it will have these little yellow aphids, and they get all over the stems and the leaves. They get all over the plant. It's not really a great thing. It's not particularly good for the butterfly. But if you really try to clean it off, then you may, if it's a more mature milkweed, you may end up knocking off the monarch eggs, or even the little tiny caterpillars, the larvae. So what do you do? And what I do when I do have, and we have had some milkweed, it's not been a complete failure. I usually do, if they're really infested, I just wipe them off with my fingers. It's disgusting. They get yellow, but that's what I do. And so what am I trying to do here? I'm just trying to reduce their numbers. You're not going to get rid of them. You don't go spraying them with soap and with various other things, because you're spraying your monarch butterfly eggs and larvae as well. So just try to push it in the right direction, so gently.
So I'm going to address that also, because I have never done this. I've done the same thing, just smear the aphids off. For those of you, gardening, it's hands-on. But Bug Bob Allen talks about carefully removing them with a Q-tip with alcohol. So I did put in the YouTube or in the chat a YouTube about that. Actually, it's a YouTube about all these things, and he is the expert as far as the bugs go, being an entomologist. So that would be a great place to go after this, or if you can't do any more screen time tonight, maybe tomorrow. And you can save the chat, I believe. So, but also other things do, in fact, also Vince Scheit, biologist in San Diego County, says that a dry Q-tip also works.
So then you don't get yellow fingertips. Yes.
Right, exactly. But an important thing to think about is if it's not killing the plants, aphids invite ladybugs and other beneficial insects. So if your plant is living through it, it probably will live through it. So all these methods, like Barbara said, are only if the plant is really stressed.
Right, but if it's, even if the plant's living, if it's completely covered with aphids, then it's hard for the monarch to lay its eggs on it. So I think you do want to try to reduce the numbers if you can. And I guess that's what Bob was talking about, was trying to make it a better habitat for the monarch, not just keeping the plant alive.
I think in that you also answered another further down question from Tuchis Rose, who had little orange seed looking eggs on it, but the plant turned black and died. Does that sound like?
Sounds like it.
All right.
Yeah.
Wendy Dunbar raised her hand. I'm going to go ahead and ask her to ask her question.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to know, is it safe to grow milkweed in a yard where pets are going to be frequenting?
Do your pets eat your plants?
My cats, yes. I mean, they eat the grass that ends up growing, you know, the weedy grasses and things. So possibly.
Yeah, milkweed, the narrow-leaf milkweed, I have heard has it's really not very poisonous. And I doubt if it would give your cat any trouble. If it might give him a stomachache, it might be bitter or something like that. But I suspect, anybody else know? I don't think that it's a problem with pets to grow milkweed. Oh, Helena.
So
Hi.
grass is a sweet plant, and not that cats don't tell sweet, but plants that are poisonous like milkweed are more likely to be bitter.
Okay.
So unless you actually see them eating it, I think it's unlikely, but you might want to actually grow a little, maybe California brome, or not the non-native bad bromes, but California brome is not too far out of its range. There's a Cucamonga variety, or Melica imperfecta. Those are two grasses that I really, really like, that are perennial, that your cat could eat. Without having to have a lawn.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I'll put them in the chat.
Helena, did you have something to add about pets?
I have cats, and they don't bother my milkweeds. They eat the grass and nibble on the sages, but not the milkweed.
Okay, great. And my dogs too will eat some of the grass that grows in the yard. So I'm going to assume that's the same.
Okay, sounds good.
So Vince Streit tells us that the latex in milkweed is extremely bitter and cats will not eat it.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, the next question that I have here is from Brenda Cannell. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself if you can.
Yeah.
This question was regarding not finding monarch caterpillars on the narrow leaf milkweed they have in their garden, but finding it on the tropical milkweed, finding their caterpillars on the tropical milkweed. Is there a preference that they're having for that tropical milkweed? That's another reason to not plant it.
I don't think that there is necessarily a preference for the tropical. I think the difference is that the tropical tends just to be greener, have more stems, have more leaves, have more flowers. And also, we are talking about the difference between migratory and residential populations of monarch. And those that have been breeding on the tropical milkweed in your neighbor's yard, in your yard, everywhere else, they're out of sync with the seasons. And so they come looking for a place, and your tropical milkweed is there. I have not seen any place, it's said, unless somebody contradicts me now, I've not seen that tropical milkweed is tastier. I think it's just more abundant and lusher and there for a longer period of time. So
great. Our next question is from Joy Walters. Joy, I've asked you to unmute yourself if you want to ask it.
Oh, yes, I wrote it down and I'm not sure where it is now. I hope I can
Oh, I'm sorry.
the way, the same way.
That was your question.
It was it was on Barbara's show. You passed by a
Yes, I
leaf
did.
blower. And if I remember how I phrased this, how does the leaf blower, can you describe what happens to the chrysalis or the plant or the condition for the plant, the butterfly? How does affect that system?
Right, that's a really good question. You know, people talk about planting native plants in order to create habitat. You can plant native plants and not create habitat. And the way you do that is by keeping your garden very, very neat. It's by using blowers. It's by raking all the leaves. It's by cutting off all the dead stems. All of those things provide habitat. And the leaf blower is the worst of all. As you can just imagine, that blast of air just, I mean, we're dry and that just desiccates everything. It blows everything away. It desiccates everything. So if I were to change one thing to create better habitat would be to get rid of those mower blower things. Just get rid of them. They should go away. They're devastating. And furthermore, they're unhealthy for everybody and everything. They're not good for us either.
Yeah.
So let's do it. Let's get rid of them.
I'm trying.
Yeah, just us. You know?
More specific that I can get to what happens to plants and to soil and to understanding the habitat, the better. That's why I was asking the question. The better that I can then transfer that information to people who need to have it as a way to transfer from using a leaf blower to maybe migrate into a more regenerative kind of gardening situation. So it's for me to be able to explain to somebody else, and that's why I asked the question.
Right, and you know, a rake is better than a leaf blower. Or it's better not even to use a rake, but you know, it's a lot better than the leaf blower. We don't have a lot of water, and you know, we get some fog, and when we get it in the morning, it can be damp, even though it hasn't rained for months. You can have dampness along the soil. Now, if you use a leaf blower, you dry it up. It's dry, and life cannot coexist with a blower. I don't know. If you just stop and think about what it must be like to have that blower hit those plants and the soil, it's death. It just doesn't work. So I don't know, is that specific enough?
It's there, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Dolan Hunter with a question about propagation.
Hi, I tried propagating my Fescularis indoors via the wet paper towel method with a dilution of hydrogen peroxide in water. Has anyone seen any success with that, just out of curiosity?
Seeds? You're talking about seeds?
Yes.
Okay. I think you could do this. I think the peroxide may be a problem. The reason that you would use a very dilute amount of peroxide is so that you don't get damping off. Damping off is when it gets moldy and the seedling just kind of just breaks off and falls down. So this is why you're trying to avoid that. And another possibility, rather than using it in the paper towel and with the seed, is to use a sterile medium. Paper towel is sterile enough. And somebody told me they did this already, and I was thinking of trying it just to give it a go, to just germinate the milkweed seed and then put it in some soil that is pasteurized. So you want to get potting soil. Maybe you want to add a little bit of perlite to it to get some decent drainage. A friend of mine is propping the seeds in peat pots, and she's had more success. I think what they've done is germinated sooner because those peat pots are darker And so I think this is just conjecture on my part. I think that it's just a little warmer. And so they're coming up a couple of days early, and that you'll see it in the others. So the point of the peroxide is just so you don't get damping off. I think you should try to avoid using it and just use paper towels and see what happens, and then put it in some soil. But I have been told that the best thing to do with milkweed seed is to go directly in the ground. So.
And I want to speak to the peroxide issue. A few years back, I was trying to, with my propagation, use some best practices, and I looked into some of the with some of the fungal issues that there was a product, and I don't remember the name of it, but it was a acetic acid and hydrogen peroxide mix that you would mix up a dilute solution and wash your equipment with it, and in a little bit more dilute solution you'd apply it to the to the water that you use to water your plants, so that it would kind of keep fungal activity, kind of knock it down in your soil. My experience was everything's going fine, and then one time when I did this kind of weekly treatment, 80% of my plants just died. I evidently got the concentration wrong and killed everything. So be real careful with that stuff.
So I'm just gonna insert myself in the process. And so the fungal thing is one thing, but a lot of seed treatments are just not basic. So this is not my area of expertise, because I'm more of a designer than a propagation manager. But a lot of the seed treatments in the Dara Emery book, which would be my Bible for things like that. And I'm sorry, I did not look this up before we came.
It says nothing, use nothing. I did look it up.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
no treatment.
So if I wanted to try to do any treatment, I might do stratification, especially for the more higher elevation milkweeds. And stratification is putting them in some peat moss and putting them in the fridge. But I will say to the very new gardener who was with us before, because I am one person and I grow a lot of my veggies in very small quantities, I germinate everything in paper towels. It just, it's the easy way. You can see it, then put it in your peat moss, and you
Nice.
haven't wasted anything.
Nice.
Okay, next up, Stephen Kutcher raised his hand to ask a question.
Hey, Stephen.
There we go. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if you know this or not, but not all gardeners garden the same. And not all people have the same opinions. And I am so on the other side with so many things. So let me try to make this short, but I have too much to talk about. Because I got my master's thesis studying milkweed bugs, so I studied Asclepias fascicularis in the Santa Monica Mountains for a long time. I've been raising monarchs using tropical milkweed since 1994 at my house in Arcadia. I have about 60 plants. I have discovered a new fly, an agromyzid fly. It's a new species of fly that affects tropical milkweed. It's unnamed because it's new to science. In studying that fly with the milkweed, I found 4 parasites, 4 wasp parasites that parasitize the fly. I also did observations on aphids, and I found very interesting things. There are many, there are a few micro wasp species that go after the aphids. So when you see discolored aphids, that's a good thing because the wasps are in there working on the aphids. And if you want to see something really fantastic, take one of those leaves with aphids on it and put it under the microscope. It is really amazing to see, which also led me to understand that monarchs are not vegetarians, because when they eat the leaves, they will eat scale and eggs and other small things. So they are really omnivores. because these things are sessile on the leaf and don't move. Rats will come in and eat my tropical milkweed. Rats are my scourge. Native milkweed, which I love, lives in disturbed soil. And I've made many observations that. And then I love the Xerxes Society, but I have to disagree with their approach to tropical milkweed, because if you ever look around Los Angeles is not native. There are all these oriental exotic plants. So the butterflies are very adaptive. And I could speak, I've done life cycles, I've photographed. I will give you probably at my peak, and I've noticed the same thing. The monarchs, I hardly had any monarchs in my yard. At my peak, I had 12 monarchs flying around my house. And here's something that you might find interesting. I would take, because I'm an entomologist, I have dead monarchs. I mount them up. And there's too much to talk about, but you can take a dead monarch, mount it, put it on a stick about 3 feet above the ground, and the monarchs will swoop in on it, thinking it's another monarch. You can set up your camera and take pictures of the monarchs coming in to that. And the OE problem, I'm looking into that now a little bit. It is a big problem. And the issues that you brought up about keeping milkweed during the wintertime, that's true. You will, I hope someday to write something up about this new little fly. When you look at the leaf, and this is one of the tropical leaves, I didn't have an example of it. I ran out to see if I had it. They're all gone. They start coming in right around March. So they should be coming in soon. And so I'm going to stop there.
You
So
know,
just to let you know.
I'm really glad you brought this up, because I'm not unaware of this. I think that Arthur Shapiro from UC Davis has also supported the idea that tropical milkweed, if you need to cut it back, that's one thing. And I forgot what the guy's name in Berkeley who does the bee gardening.
Gordon Franke.
Yeah, Gordon Franke. I think he also took the point of view that non-native plants were fine for pollinators. And I suspect, I mean, I'm not going to dispute these people who've made it their life's work to study these organisms, as opposed to what I happen to think. And you too sound like you've expended a lot of time and effort observing them and studying them. But we do know that there's a very big problem. And there are probably many reasons for this problem. I think the fires, I think climate change, the use of pesticides, and just there are all the loss of habitat more than anything else. Many of those overwintering groves are just senescent. They're just dying, and they're eucalyptus. And like I mentioned, Travis Longcore just wrote something on how he does not think that we're going to be able to maintain those overwintering populations using only native trees. So this whole issue of native versus non-native is certainly one that will be discussed and considered for years and years. But with the monarchs, their population really, really sunk. And, we have to act quickly. So we act with incomplete information. And I could see the possibility that by getting rid of all the tropical milkweed, we provide less habitat for them, not more. And so I worry about that. There it is. I mean, we don't know a lot of things about these animals. So thank you.
My friend who raises monarchs released 300. She told me she released 300 in this past year, because she's had good success, but she's really, really careful about tachinid flies and other predators and parasites.
Because Xerxes also opposes raising monarchs on their website. Do you know why?
No, I've wanted to have that conversation. I'm a friend of Bob Pyle, and I know that we would all love to have just natives, I think. But we live in a world that isn't like that, and you can't put it back. So you have to adapt to it. And I think having sources of milkweed, and one of the reasons I was successful for so many years is because I had about 60 milkweed plants in a third of an acre in a circle. And it was like a big island. So when they came in, it wasn't just one plant.
Right, right.
And I ran across somebody in Altadena who had a whole front strip in front of his house was all milkweed. He saw me out there and he asked me what I was doing, and I was observing. But I've been paying a lot of attention to this little fly, this little agromycid fly. I know it's in Ventura, Orange County, probably all over Southern California by now. And I'm suspicious, since it's a new species, that it was brought in by somebody like Home Depot or somebody who introduced some plants from out of the country, and the fly is half the size of a fruit fly. It's really tiny, these agromycids, but they're very interesting flies. Anyway, I didn't want to occupy all this. It's just that it happens to be one of my areas of expertise, and I thought I should disseminate some of that information.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I think Rebecca is going to have me answer a question, but before we do that, I want to say that I did put a YouTube in the chat and monarch parasites. And the YouTube is Bob Allen, and he discusses the OE issue at length. And in his view is that you need the non-native milkweed must be cut back from October 1 to March 1. And I think that Barbara already said this, but I do want to reiterate it right now while we're in the discussion. That's October 1 to March 1, which means to me, if you have that, probably we're just at the end of February, so that's probably okay. But in the YouTube, Bob discusses, all the mechanism, and one thing is that because butterflies visit the non-native milkweed, they're bringing it to it. They're bringing the parasite to it. So it's the vector. Some people may not understand the rationale, but because so many monarchs are visiting the milkweed, they are leaving it for the next monarch. For those of you who would like it in very plain language. And then I think are we discussing, Rebecca, pollinator plants?
Yeah, Jay Lieske asked what good winter pollinators would be in a heavily shaded area, and Orchid answered that in the comments, and it was just a great answer. So I wanted to make sure anybody who doesn't see the chat.
So I did put these in the chat, but Baelia, even though it's a desert plant, it will tolerate some light shade. You see this at Rancho Santa Ana Botanic Garden. Siphotrichum and the other asters can be pretty late plants, especially if they get water. So Siphotrichum and Porothrogeny, which used to be Lysyngia, so aster silver carpet, and the other asters often bloom late. And so if you're trying for a plant that would grow in shade, some of the Siphotrichums are kind of riparian. And I think Ascendens is one of them, but there's more than one. There's a lot of Siphotrichums in California, I believe. So basically your purple asters and your Baelia. And Baelia, because it blooms nearly all the time. If you can get it past the 4-inch stage, it's often sold in 4-inch because it doesn't live very well in pots. And it's not going to grow in the dark shade. So we're just talking high filtered shade. And I'm going to hand that. I'm going to see if Barbara has any other ideas about, plants that could grow in December for butterflies.
Well, I don't know if I'm going to go December, but I'm going to talk about the very earliest bloomers. The ribes are going to give you blooms in February into March. So that's a nice early one. That'll take some shade. Mule fat does it. It blooms very early and has a lot of pollinators on it. And then finally, this is not a shade tolerant plant, but I've seen it growing in the shade and it looks okay. Bladder pod, that blooms basically all year and it's a heavy bloomer. So give it as much sun as you possibly can and see if it'll do it. Yep.
So the ribes and the
mule fat.
Sorry, the manzanita, right?
Oh,
the mule fat.
manzanita.
So the mule fat is in the aster family. So that's an
Okay.
early. There's your early aster family plant. And remember, for those of you who did your botany before now, that's the sunflower family or the composite family.
And yeah, I would also mention that in the nature park in South Pasadena, our annual sunflowers will go, they'll go till almost October. You know, so now we're talking October. Now it's just like that November, December. There isn't a lot out there that's doing much. Bladder pod is one of them, and the other ones that Orchid mentioned. But then by February, you know, January, we start to pick up the manzanitas blooming. And then we get into February with the ribes and some of the ceanothus. And late February, we get into the Salvia munzii. So yeah, you can almost cover it all. A number of the ones I mentioned, though, are not particularly shade tolerant, but you give it a try.
And Jay, who asked the question, wants to add some more to the question, I think. Jay?
Yeah, I was wondering, like for these December pollinators, are they floating around in places that are mostly shade? Like I'm on the north side of a hill. So even if I struggle to get things to bloom in December, will anything be visiting?
Not a lot, because there's not a lot of flowers out there.
I mean, it depends if you expand your definition of pollinators. So hummingbirds, you know, do need to get through December, and so the ribes, some of the ribes like Ribes californicum does bloom in December. That was one of my earliest questions to Mickey Long. What is this plant doing blooming in December? So the manzanitas, are a good bee plant as well. I mean, some bees don't pollinate them, they rob, but other bees do, especially your smaller native bees, do use the manzanitas, and the low growing ones are mostly from coastal areas. So they do also grow in shady locations. But yeah, your butterflies are probably not moving on your north side until, you know, even, I mean, I have butterflies on my north side, but that's because they're going from south to north in May. So at elevation in May.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next up we had a question from Tanara. If you're able to unmute yourself and ask yourself.
Hi. Yeah.
Hello.
Hi, Tahare. I wanted to ask, so why do these aphids come to the milkweeds in such abundance? What brings this aphid population to the milkweeds, the native milkweeds? And the non-native.
Any milkweed.
Yeah.
I got nothing. Anybody else?
You know, it's what they like.
Okay.
You know, that no more science than that.
Okay.
I
was just thinking that I'm doing something wrong in the rest of the garden, because suddenly my milkweeds are infested with aphids. And then, so what am I doing that I have this many aphids on these milkweeds?
So aphids are food for other things.
Yes.
So like, you know, my favorite, the first time I ever saw Bob Allen speak, and I'm referencing him a lot today, but I did learn a lot of my wildlife and especially pollinator gardening thoughts from him. He said, you know, if your plants are perfect, you know, if nothing has chewed on your plant, you're doing it wrong.
Mm.
So I feel like this is kind of like, you know, this isn't the killing 100 plants thing, but if you don't have holes in your leaves, you don't have a habitat garden.
Yeah, no.
So if all your leaves are perfect, then you're not even in our game. So if you have lots of aphids, that's the foundation. I mean, you know, having lots of bugs on your plants is the foundation for every other thing. Mice, lizards, birds, everything else lives off the bugs that live off your plants.
Mm.
You bring up a good question, though. And I don't know the answer to this. They're called Oleander Aphids. I don't know if they're non-native, if they were brought in with our ornamentals. Are they, you know, just something that then loves milkweed so much? So after this talk, that's a very interesting question. I will see if I can get any information on it, or if anybody in our group now. Stephen, you seem to know a lot about pollinators and little tiny wasps and bees. I don't know if you know about Oleander Aphids.
I think that they are native, and but they'll be found on both oleander and milkweed. And I just went out into my garden just to show you some seedlings. So this is how I grow my seedlings. I take a plastic pot, I put a pot inside. These are tropical milkweed. You can see how large they are. There's no OE on it because they're brand new. And I also have them in a larger stage. When they reach about this size, I take them and separate them out and put 3 in a pot, a 5-gallon pot. So that's how I've had good success just raising them in the pot. I put them on the soil. I cover them up with a little bit of soil. I make sure they're damp. And at first you go, they're never going to come up. And then they come up looking like that.
Mm-hmm. And you cut them back every year for the winter?
Now that's where Bob and I disagree.
Mm-hmm.
I keep them all year long. I've had monarchs all year long because I've created this island where they live. The past few years, very few monarchs.
Huh.
But I disagree with that approach. I think I think that if they're there and the monarchs are going to use them, and you have nectaring plants, they have everything they need. And I've never had a problem with frost. The biggest problems I have were all the diseases. OE, there's a bacterial disease, and they just wipe them out. And here's another little thing. Rather than being careful and using a Q-tip, take the egg off, put it in a separate place when it hatches it out, rear it up. And you can rear it up by just taking leaves off the other milkweed plants until it's large enough that you could put it back or follow it all the way through. So I wouldn't be so concerned about not hurting it. I'd be more concerned about taking it off and putting it in a safe place.
Interesting. I know I'm not going to do that, but Mickey?
Mickey, you're on mute.
Yeah, he's trying to unmute it.
There you are.
Okay. Bob Allen's book with Fred and Bob's book says the oleander, originally from the Mediterranean region, introduced around the world with oleander, a commonly cultivated shrub with and its primary host. There's no males. Females give live birth to the young, all female, a process known as parthenogenesis.
Wow.
I don't like them.
No.
Well, I've lost 2 or 3 Asclepias fascicularis to aphids. The leaves fall off, the plant droops, I water it, it dies faster. I scrape them off. I tried spraying. So soap isn't good, I guess. I don't know. I've got an Asclepias coming back right now in my front yard. Fascicularis just started popping up the last few weeks. So they got a foot high. They all get about a foot high, and then I lose them, mostly to the aphids or summer heat. I actually see them. They seem to die in the summer heat. So I think I'll try one of the nice broad-leaved ones, or a few of those, and maybe I'm
Like Ariocarpa.
not planting enough.
Right.
What about Asclepias Ariocarpa? I know it's sometimes called Indian milkweed and
Yeah.
Katoka or something like
Looks
that.
good. I think I may switch. It's got a lot more meat to it anyway.
It does. It does. And also very local milkweed.
Okay, so the last question that got asked, I think Orchid answered it in the chat. It was from Vince Scheit. He's left the chat, so I'll ask it for him for anybody who's not reading it. It's, can any California native milkweeds be propagated by cutting?
And so what I told Vince is, so again, I am not, propagation is not the main thing that I do. But in my experience, a lot of species which are rhizomatous, such as the Asclepias fascicularis, can be propagated by cuttings if you get some of the root in your cutting, which means it would have already had to pop up somewhere else for you to do that, if that makes sense. It's gonna.
Oh, it's not really a stem cutting.
Yeah, I'm saying not a stem cutting. I'm saying, it's gonna go underground. You would have to wait until it's big enough to go underground and pop up somewhere else, and then get some of that root with it. And I have not tried that myself, but I've done it on many other rhizomatous species. I don't think the other milkweeds are rhizomatous in the same way.
If I ever get enough of that stuff, I'll give it a try. So, okay.
Well, we are at 9 o'clock, and we have run through all the questions in the chat. So, we can open it up if folks want to keep asking questions among themselves for a little bit. But do you guys, how are you two feeling?
I feel fine. I just want to mention that Jesse Chang said that he successfully made stem cuttings of fascicularis at a high success rate.
Jesse.
So thank you, Jesse. People don't usually do it that way. They do it from seed, usually. So, or roots. Yeah. I'm fine if there are other questions or if anybody else has something to contribute in the way of, what they've done. And I appreciate the discussion that we had about native versus non-native. I think that this question continues and it deserves discussion with scientists involved who really can provide us with solid information.
Karen has a question.
Hi, thank you, Barbara and Orchid. Great program. And I'm already getting people on Facebook asking questions. Somebody's not muted. Anyway, okay, there we go. But is this recording going to be available on the website?
Yes, I believe so.
Yes,
that is the plan.
A lot of people will, I'm sure, find that I'm disappointed that my bird group, a lot of people didn't come over because everybody's freaking out because they have to take down their feeders now and looking for plant alternatives. And so I'm typing as I'm listening to give them alternatives with plants, but this will be a great program to share. So thank you very much.
Karen, I've been seeing this on Facebook, particularly through the Monrovia Bird Group. So this seems to be a really big problem that we're experiencing this year. And again, when we see these kinds of problems, they typically have many, many causes, you know, global climate change, it's too hot, it's been too dry, the birds can't get their food elsewhere. But I think, and Steve, I know that you're going to disagree with me. I really think that we need to rely on nature because there are oftentimes these unintended consequences. We want to do the right thing and we make things worse. So the bird issue, big one. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, if people don't clean their bird feeders, and I think more and more people were feeding this year because they were home and bored and entertained by birds. But yeah, definitely get the yard going with native plants. And you know, if you want to do some supplemental feeding when this disease goes away, fine. But thank you. This recording is going to be great.
Yes, we do plan to put the video up on our on YouTube and linked from our website, but it has been taking a little while for us to get that done. So don't be surprised if it's not there tomorrow.
Okay.
And I will, like I mentioned, I'm giving a talk on the 6th of March. It'll be a Zoom talk that will be posted, and I will post on my website, Weeding Wild Suburbia. My presentation will be posted just as I do a PDF thing, but I won't post it until after I give that talk, and it'll have references and places you can go for more information. So
that's great. I really want to thank everybody for the discussion, and especially our commentators and our administrator who kept it going very smoothly. And all I had to do is sit back and watch and listen. That was great.
this was really fun for me because I miss you guys. We're all in our houses. It was nice to have a social gathering where we could discuss things and disagree. So thank you all.
I want to second what Barbara said and just say this is so much more fun than talking and staring at my own slow.
And Tuchis also has another question, it looks like.
Okay.
Hi there. Thank you for this. I wanted to ask if anybody knows about this particular issue. In the last election, there was a proposition, and I think it passed, where I believe the Santa Monica Mountains was extending more wild space from Santa Monica further east into the Hollywood Hills. And I asked if it was going further east because I am near Eagle Rock and Atwater Village. And I've been noticing that all the wild hillside land is now just being bought up like crazy for development. And I wanted to know, does anyone know who we can contact to try to get a proposition like that passed in this area? I've been doing some Zooms on some things, on some subjects, like, for instance, bird migration. And they were talking about the biggest problem is that, for instance, lower income areas, and this was part of redlining, was not to have a lot of trees. Because it would not have shelter outside. It wouldn't be pleasant outside. Therefore, people would be cramped in their homes and they could build more mass housing. Whereas if you look on the more affluent areas, and especially on the west side, they have a lot more trees. So this is not only a situation dealing with native plants, but also with environmental justice. And my concern is that especially on the east side, that the development is going to get rampant and a lot of these green spaces are going to be gone.
I just put it in the chat. Judy Chu has been a big proponent of saving well, particularly the San Gabriel mountain areas, and they're extending that protection. But she would kind of have the groundwork of what you should be able to do, or what you should do to take steps forward in getting that land protected in that way. So I would check in with her office, Judy Chu. They just had a Zoom presentation today. Adam Schiff was there, and there was a couple of people from Northern California that were on the Zoom talk. But I know for sure that Judy Chu would know how to go forward on that.
I agree with Joy that Judy Chu would be a person to start with. She and her staff are very much involved in any of the things that have to do with the federal lands here in LA County. Okay, well,
can I jump in on that a little bit too?
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Yeah, and I would recommend finding your greenest city council or town council members and working with them too. And Adam Schiff, Anthony Portantino, and Judy Chu, and also contact, your county supervisor, but getting a relationship with your local government and getting involved with organizations that preserve land. So yeah, thank you for caring and good luck. Keep us posted.
Okay, I think it's about time to say goodnight. Remember that 4 weeks from today, we'll have Cynthia Powell addressing us in another Zoom meeting similar to this one. And I encourage you to get out. Weather's getting better, and the flowers are coming out. So everybody get out and get some of your therapy sessions out in the wild. So with that, we'll say good night.
Okay, thank you all.
Good night, and thank you, everyone.
Night.
Good night.
Barbara and Orchid.